The sun rose blood-red over Leyte Gulf, marking the 23rd day since Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto's squadron had received their last proper rations. He traced a finger along his collarbone, now protruding beneath his once crisp uniform. The proud Zero pilot, who had once downed 3 Hellcats in a single engagement, now commanded 12 hollow-cheeked men who spoke of white rice with religious reverence. Gin Gohan, they whispered. Silver rice. Food so rare it had acquired mythical status. Lieutenant, Ensign Matsuda approached. Hashimoto is not responding. Yamamoto found his wingman curled against a palm tree. 3 weeks ago, Hashimoto had used a rusted tanto blade to saw through his own femur after gangrene had bloomed around shrapnel wounds. No medical supplies remained to treat him. "Cover him," Yamamoto ordered. "Use his jacket. Save his boots for Tanaka." Imperial Command's last transmission had arrived 16 days ago. Fight with spiritual strength when physical resources fail. The Yamato spirit requires no sustenance but honor. At dusk, Lieutenant Morita returned from a foraging patrol with 3 coconuts and a handful of bitter roots for 12 men. "The Americans have established a new camp beyond the ridge," he reported. "They threw away more food preparing one meal than we have seen in a month." The daily caloric intake of Japanese forces had plummeted from 2,270 calories to less than 950. His men had resorted to boiling leather belts for soup. Second Lieutenant Saito suddenly stood, drawing his officer's sword. "We should die with honor. Better to fall charging the Americans than waste away like beggars." 7 men rose to join him, their emaciated frames somehow straightening with final purpose. Yamamoto watched them disappear into the gathering darkness, knowing they would never return. As night fell completely, American voices approached his hiding spot. Yamamoto pressed himself against the earth, still too proud to surrender, too exhausted to run. "Gentlemen, this chocolate bar can withstand 120-degree heat, contains 600 calories, and will not melt in a soldier's pocket even in the South Pacific sun." Milton Hershey, 82 years old, slid the brown bar across the polished mahogany table toward Colonel Paul Logan of the Army Quartermaster Corps. The Washington, D.C. meeting room felt unnecessarily cold for April 1942, but Hershey knew it was deliberate, a test of his chocolate's resilience. Colonel Logan broke off a piece and took a tentative bite. "It tastes terrible," he finally pronounced. Milton Hershey smiled. "That's intentional. This D ration is emergency sustenance, not a treat. We made it just palatable enough that a hungry soldier will eat it, but not so delicious he'll consume it recreationally. And you can mass produce these? My factory in Hershey, Pennsylvania can deliver 100,000 units daily to start. Within 6 months, we'll reach 500,000 daily. By 1943, we're projecting weekly production of 24 million units. That's more than 1 billion chocolate bars annually, calculated Major Peterson, greater than Japan's entire ammunition production by weight. The D-ration specifications were demanding: 4 ounces, high melting point, 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 600 calories, stable in extreme environments. But Hershey had solved every challenge. The resulting bar would be followed by a tropical variant capable of withstanding even greater temperatures. Colonel Logan reached a decision. "Mr. Hershey, the United States Army would like to place an initial order for 20 million units. You'll have the first million within 30 days, Hershey promised. By the time Hershey returned to Pennsylvania that evening, His factories were already retooling. The first of what would eventually be 3 billion chocolate bars had begun rolling off assembly lines. "Send them everywhere our boys are fighting," Hershey instructed. "Every bar is a bullet in its own way." What the elderly chocolate magnate couldn't know was that his factories would soon produce more calories for American troops than the entire Japanese home islands could generate for their civilian population. Private First Class Robert Bobby Hutchinson of the 127th Infantry Regiment tore open his K ration with practiced ease, the morning Wisconsin chill at Camp McCoy making his fingers slightly clumsy. October 29, 1945. The war was over, but the Army still moved with its own mysterious momentum. "Gonna be getting the first batch of Japs today," Sergeant Willis announced. "Don't fraternize, don't antagonize. Just do your jobs." Bobby nodded absently, focused on his breakfast. The K ration contained the usual items: powdered coffee, 4 sugar cubes, tin of chopped ham and eggs, crackers, D-ration chocolate bar, and a pack of Wrigley's spearmint gum. He pocketed the gum, his 5th pack that week, and grimaced at the chocolate. "Christ, I hate these things," he muttered. "Tastes like a boiled potato dipped in cocoa powder." "Trade it to Wilson for cigarettes," Private Jenkins suggested from the next bunk. An informal exchange economy had developed around unwanted ration items. The quartermaster sergeant had accumulated so many chocolate bars that he'd built a small pyramid on his desk. The Great Temple of Unwanted Hershey, he called it. The supply depot at Camp McCoy currently stocked over 280,000 chocolate bars and 120,000 packs of gum. By war's end, the average American serviceman had chewed through more than 630 sticks of gum. Bobby himself had consumed 274 chocolate bars during his 17 months in uniform. He'd thrown away at least half that many. Outside, trucks rumbled into the compound with the first Japanese prisoners. They were thin, almost skeletal compared to the beefy MPs guiding them. "Think they got chocolate in Japan?" Jenkins asked. "Sergeant said these guys were starving on some island when they surrendered." Bobby took a last bite of the D-ration bar, then tossed it into the already overflowing waste bin. The chocolate landed atop discarded gum wrappers, half-eaten caramels, and unopened packets of sugar cubes. He grabbed his rifle, completely unaware that his casual disposal of a single chocolate bar would soon shatter the worldview of a Japanese naval officer. Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto stood frozen in the doorway of Barrack 17, his freshly issued prisoner identification card hanging around his neck. 3 months of near starvation had reduced his once athletic frame to 97 pounds of sinew stretched over bone. The processing officer had noted his condition as moderately malnourished. Apparently, many arrived in worse shape. Before him, an American private, little more than a boy with sunburned cheeks, sat on his bunk reading a magazine. With absent-minded distaste, the soldier tossed a half-eaten Hershey's tropical bar into a waste bin. The chocolate bar, designed to withstand 120-degree heat, packed with 600 calories, worth its weight in gold on any Pacific island, discarded like a spent cigarette. Yamamoto's mind reeled. 3 weeks ago, he had watched his men fight over a handful of maggot-infested rice. On Leyte, an officer had committed seppuku after accidentally dropping his daily ration in the mud. The emperor himself reportedly ate plain millet to conserve national resources. Yet here was this American boy casually discarding what would have been a week's ration in the Pacific Theater. The private noticed Yamamoto's stare and looked up. "Hey there," he said, reaching beside his bunk. "You want one of these?" They taste like crap." He held up a fresh bar from a box containing 48 more, plus 3 packs of Wrigley's spearmint gum. "Take 'em all if you want," the American continued, lighting a cigarette. "Supply drop came in this morning. We got crates of this stuff." Yamamoto felt something break inside him, not his pride or his courage, but something more fundamental. The ideological certainty that had sustained him through starvation and defeat. With trembling hands, he accepted the offered chocolate. The bar felt impossibly heavy in his palm. "Thank you," he whispered in careful English. The American nodded, already turning back to his magazine, the entire interaction already forgotten. But for Yamamoto, the world had irreversibly changed. In the darkness of Barrack 17, Yamamoto divided his chocolate bar with surgical precision. 7 other Japanese officers watched in reverent silence as he cut the precious square into 8 equal pieces. The ritual of sharing took on ceremonial weight, each man accepting his portion with a formal bow. "Is this typical?" whispered Captain Hiroshi Tanaka, former commander of a destroyer escort sunk off Saipan. "Do all American soldiers receive such supplies?" "The private called it garbage," Yamamoto replied. "He offered me an entire box containing 48 more. A stunned silence followed. Commander Shigeru Nakano, who had surrendered after his submarine ran out of fuel, finally spoke. "On my last patrol, we divided a single sweet potato among 23 men. One by one, the officers shared their stories of deprivation, infantry surviving on grass soup in the Philippines, pilots flying 16-hour missions on a handful of rice, medical officers choosing which wounded would receive the last morphine ampules. Their enlisted men receive more sugar daily than our officers saw monthly," noted Lieutenant Kobayashi. "I watched their cooks throw away half-full cans of fruit this morning." Nakano pulled a small notebook from his pocket and began calculating. "If what we've observed is standard practice, then the average American soldier consumes approximately 50 times the calories in sugar products alone than our forces received in total rations." The officers fell silent again, the implications sinking in. It wasn't just about hunger or comfort. The industrial gap represented something far more fundamental. Their hushed conversation stopped abruptly as the barracks door swung open. A young American guard entered, whistling tunelessly. Without ceremony, he tossed a cardboard box onto the central table. "Extras from today's shipment," he announced, barely glancing at the Japanese officers. "Mess hall got ice cream instead. Figured you guys might want 'em." The box contained 24 Hershey bars and a dozen packs of chewing gum. After the guard departed, Commander Nakano picked up his pencil again. "We must revise our calculations," he said quietly. "The disparity is even greater than we thought." Major Kenji Nakamura, former logistics officer for the Imperial Japanese Army's 25th Division, sat stiffly across from Captain James Miller in the administrative office of Camp McCoy. The American officer had agreed to Nakamura's unusual request to better understand the supply chain that supported the U.S. military. "These are the production figures you requested," Miller said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Standard issue for troops in the Pacific Theater." Nakamura opened the folder with steady hands. His eyes moved methodically down the typed pages, his expression unchanging until he reached the weekly chocolate production statistics. "This cannot be correct," he said, tapping the number. 24 million units weekly from a single factory? Hershey's Pennsylvania plant alone, Miller confirmed. There were others. Nakamura's training as a logistics officer allowed him to grasp the implications immediately. He quickly calculated. America's confectionery production reached 3.5 billion units annually during wartime. Japan's total food imports for 1945 had fallen to 236,000 tons, down from 1,675,000 tons in 1940. The sugar allocated just for American military candy exceeded Japan's total sugar imports. "We intercepted your supply vessels when possible," Nakamura said carefully. "We considered it a significant victory to capture even one American transport." Miller nodded. "Standard procedure." "What percentage of your supply chain would you estimate we managed to disrupt?" The American captain considered. "Less than 3% overall." Nakamura stared at the numbers again. His entire career had been dedicated to stretching Japan's dwindling resources, calculating how to distribute starvation rations, determining which units would receive ammunition and which would be left with empty rifles. "There is one more thing you should know," Miller added. "Those D-ration bars? Most of our men hated them. Probably half were thrown away." Something broke inside Nakamura. His perfect military posture collapsed as he lowered his head. "So we were not defeated by your bombs or bullets," he whispered. "We were defeated by your ability to waste what we could not even produce." Colonel James Patterson studied the psychological warfare reports spread across his Washington office desk. July 1945. The margins of his copy were filled with annotations in his precise handwriting. "The candy strategy is working better than expected," his aide, Lieutenant Rogers, reported. "Japanese POWs are writing home about American abundance. Intercepted communications showed devastating effects on morale." Patterson nodded, pleased. What had begun as an accidental discovery, that Japanese prisoners were psychologically shattered by casual American waste, had evolved into deliberate strategy. "Visible abundance protocols in full effect?" "Yes, sir. POW camps are receiving 150% of standard ration allocations. Supply deliveries are scheduled during exercise hours so prisoners can observe the volume. Candy and sugar products are prominently displayed during Red Cross inspections." Patterson picked up a translated letter from a Japanese captain to his family in Osaka. Censors had strategically allowed certain passages to remain intact. "Americans throw away more food in one day than our regiment saw in a month. Their soldiers complain about too much chocolate." "Status on the mail forwarding?" "Letters mentioning American abundance are prioritized by censors," Rogers confirmed. "Approximately 1,200 such communications have reached the Japanese mainland through neutral diplomatic channels." The strategy extended beyond POW camps. When bombing missions permitted, B-29s would drop leaflets over Japanese positions showing American soldiers receiving ice cream and chocolate bars. In one innovative operation, bombers had dropped thousands of wrapped candies along with surrender instructions. "The Yamamoto report?" Patterson asked. Rogers handed over another folder. "Lieutenant Yamamoto's psychological evaluation indicates complete ideological collapse. He's now cooperating fully with intelligence debriefings. His testimony about American abundance has convinced 14 other officers to provide tactical information." Patterson closed the file, satisfied. What the Japanese High Command failed to understand was that America's greatest weapon wasn't its atomic bombs or its aircraft carriers. It was Hershey bars. "We're not just winning the production war," Patterson observed. "We're winning the psychological war, one chocolate bar at a time. Noriko Sato carefully unfolded the heavily censored letter from her husband, a naval officer captured near Guam. Through the black marks, one sentence remained clearly visible. They feed us 3 meals every day. Outside her small Tokyo apartment, the November rain fell steadily. She glanced at her children's ration cards on the table. 1,200 calories daily, no sugar allocation for the 3rd consecutive month. Her daughter Akiko, once plump-cheeked, now resembled a porcelain doll with hollow eyes. 8 months ago, her youngest son had died of malnutrition. The doctor had simply shrugged. "Many children are dying," he had said. "There is not enough food." A knock at the door startled her. It was Mrs. Tanaka from next door, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "My cousin surrendered on Saipan," she confided. "His letter arrived yesterday through the Red Cross. He says the Americans have warehouses full of candy while our children starve. He's gained 10 kilograms since capture." Noriko's hands trembled slightly. The official newspapers described American prisoners eating garbage and begging for rice. Yet her husband's letters hinted at the opposite reality. She had heard rumors: white bread for every American prisoner, meat twice weekly, even sugar for their coffee. Meanwhile, Tokyo civilians received less than 32 grams of rice daily. People called it victory rice, a mixture of rice and millet stretching the diminishing supply. The black market price for sugar had reached astronomical levels, 2 weeks' wages for 100 grams. Noriko hadn't tasted sweetness in 14 months. "There's more," Mrs. Tanaka continued. "My cousin says American soldiers throw away chocolate bars they don't like. They complain about the flavor, while our soldiers die of hunger." As air raid sirens began their mournful wail, Noriko carefully refolded her husband's letter. The contrast was unbearable. Her husband gaining weight in captivity while she watched her remaining children slowly wasting away in freedom. "The Americans," Mrs. Tanaka whispered as they headed for the shelter. "They have so much they can afford to feed their enemies better than we feed our own families." August 29, 1945. B-29. Superfortresses, their bomb bays now filled with supply crates instead of ordnance, circled above Noetsu prison camp. Captain Michael Reynolds, who had dropped incendiaries on Tokyo 4 months earlier, now commanded a different kind of mission. "Operation Swift Mercy, drop point in 30 seconds, his navigator announced. Below, former Sergeant Hiroshi Tanaka of the Imperial Japanese Army's 81st Infantry Division shielded his eyes against the sun. The American bombers had returned, but this time, no air raid sirens wailed. The first crates descended on parachutes striped red and white. One burst open upon impact, spilling hundreds of chocolate bars across the compound. Tanaka stared in disbelief. 3 years as a prisoner had reduced him to 84 pounds, his body a catalogue of deprivations effects: beriberi, pellagra, scurvy. American journalists photographed the scene. Emaciated prisoners clutching Hershey bars, weeping openly. Each B-29 carried 5 to 7 tons of supplies, including over 600 pounds of candy and chocolate. A single drop contained more sugar than the entire Japanese garrison had seen in 2 years of occupation. "Don't eat too fast," warned an American medic who parachuted in with medical supplies. "Your bodies can't handle sudden abundance." Some prisoners couldn't heed the warning. Medical reports later documented 17 deaths from refeeding syndrome, prisoners whose starved bodies revolted against sudden nutrition. What the prisoners couldn't know, these supply drops represented merely the overflow of America's production capacity. While Mitsubishi had struggled to produce 28,000 aircraft throughout the entire war, Hershey's single factory produced more chocolate bars in 3 days. Hidden in the hills above the camp, 3 Japanese soldiers who had refused to surrender watched the scene unfold. The youngest, Private Matsuda, turned to his sergeant. "They have enough to feed their enemies while we starve," he whispered. "How could we ever have won this war?" His sergeant had no answer. Below them, chocolate rained from American skies, the ultimate symbol of an industrial gap no warrior spirit could overcome. General Douglas MacArthur studied the industrial comparison report prepared by his staff, October 1945. The statistics revealed not just military defeat, but civilizational disparity. "Make sure the Japanese Economic Planning Committee sees these figures," he instructed his aide, Colonel Henderson. The numbers told an unmistakable story. Hershey's single Pennsylvania plant output, 24 million bars weekly, exceeded the entire Japanese aviation industry's total production, 28,000 aircraft, for the entire war. American chocolate production utilized more aluminum for wrappers than Japan allocated for fighter planes. U.S. sugar consumption during wartime remained at 5.1 million tons annually, 70% of peacetime levels, while Japanese civilians received less than 10 grams weekly per person by war's end. The Wrigley Company had produced enough chewing gum for every American service member to receive 630 sticks during their deployment. Most Japanese soldiers had never seen gum. "This isn't just about military defeat," MacArthur observed, tapping the report. "It's about completely different conceptions of what's possible." The most revealing statistic: American forces routinely discarded more calories than Japanese forces received. Reconnaissance photographs showed garbage dumps outside American bases containing more food waste than entire Japanese divisions had for rations. MacArthur understood that occupation wasn't simply about military control, but about psychological transformation. The Japanese people needed to comprehend the true nature of their defeat, not just by bombs, but by production lines. "We're implementing the new food distribution program?" he asked. Colonel Henderson nodded. "Candy rations for children begin next week. We're starting with chocolate bars for students in Tokyo, expanding to all major cities by December." MacArthur nodded, satisfied. "Defeating their military was necessary," he noted, "but showing them our grocery stores will transform their society forever." The industrial gap represented something more fundamental than military capability. It demonstrated different possibilities for organizing human society, and which system had proven superior. December 1945, Tokyo. Former Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto watched American soldiers distribute Hershey bars to a line of Japanese children outside the Meiji Elementary School. His own daughter, Akiko, 7 years old and painfully thin, clutched her newly acquired treasure, an American chocolate bar in pristine packaging. 3 months earlier, Yamamoto had been repatriated to Japan. The Americans had returned him 20 pounds heavier than when captured, an embarrassment in a city where starvation remained common. Akiko took her first bite of chocolate, her eyes widening with wonder. Yamamoto remembered his own shock at Camp McCoy, watching Bobby Hutchinson discard what would have sustained a Japanese soldier for days. "Is it good?" he asked his daughter. "It's like a dream," she whispered. The occupation forces had implemented a systematic candy distribution program. 250,000 chocolate bars weekly to Japanese children. American officials understood the psychological impact of such abundance on a starving population. Nearby, Yamamoto overheard a conversation between two Japanese businessmen watching the scene. "The Americans produce such things in the middle of war," one observed. "Imagine what we could manufacture during peace if we adopted their methods." The other nodded thoughtfully. "Their system clearly works better than ours did." This was the true victory of American democracy, not simply military triumph, but the proof of superior organization. Japanese economists had already begun developing what they called the candy metric to measure industrial recovery, how long until Japan could produce its own confections at American scale. In February 1946, the first Japanese industrial delegation would visit Hershey, Pennsylvania. The chocolate factory would become their template for rebuilding Japan's manufacturing base. Later that night, Akiko carefully preserved her chocolate wrapper as a treasure. Yamamoto watched her smooth the silver foil and bright paper, symbols of an abundance that had been unimaginable months before. "Father," she asked, "will Japan ever make chocolate like this?" "Someday," he promised, "if we learn the right lessons." Tokyo, 1980. Akiko Yamamoto, now an economic analyst for Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry, led American visitors through a state-of-the-art Japanese candy factory. Gleaming stainless steel equipment produced perfectly formed chocolate bars at a rate of 200,000 units daily. "My father said Japan's economic miracle began with a chocolate bar," she explained to the delegation. "Not the atomic bomb, but American abundance was what truly changed our understanding of what was possible." The statistics told the story of transformation. Japan's candy production had become the second largest globally, utilizing American mass production techniques. The Toyota production system, now studied worldwide, had been inspired by American wartime logistics, eliminating waste and maximizing efficiency. Japanese productivity had increased 3,000% between 1945 and 1980. The American visitors nodded appreciatively, unaware of Akiko's personal connection to this history. Few remembered that chocolate bars had once been psychological warfare, or that Hershey had produced more calories for American troops than the entire Japanese home islands could generate for their civilians. Through the factory window, Akiko spotted her elderly father waiting in the visitors' area. At 73, Takeshi Yamamoto still stood with military posture, though his uniform had long since been replaced by Western business attire. He had spent decades documenting his experiences, from the starvation on Leyte to the shock of American abundance at Camp McCoy. His memoir, Silver Rice and Chocolate Rain, had become required reading in Japanese business schools. The war's true legacy wasn't found in treaties or territorial changes, but in the fundamental reorganization of Japanese society around principles first glimpsed in a half-eaten Hershey bar, carelessly discarded by a teenage American soldier. "The war ended not with atomic light," Yamamoto had written, "but with the dark sweetness of a chocolate bar, casually given by those who had so much they could afford to give it away." As Akiko finished the tour, she quietly pocketed a single chocolate bar from the production line, a personal ritual connecting her to that first taste of abundance in December 1945.